Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to this video where we'll be introducing ourselves to exception handling. So if that sounds interesting, let's dive right in. Before even going to the details of exception handling, let us first understand what an exception is. So an exception is just an event which occurs during the execution of a program that disrupts the normal flow of the program. So I'll explain that using an example. For example, I have this code here. It's code that we wrote from the previous videos. So this code takes two inputs from the user and stores those inputs as number 1 and number 2. Then it divides those two numbers. Then it returns the quotient. It prints the quotient to the terminal. So if I run this code, it will just ask me for the first number. Let me just put there, wait for it to run first. First number, I'll just put something like 10. Then second number, I can put something like 5. Then you tell me the quotient is 2. So it will just take 10 divided by 5, that is 2. So you can see my program is just working fine. But the same program, if I just run the same program, then I put first number, I'll just maintain first number as 10. But this time for second number, I put 0. So you can see the code has no errors because it's running. You can see it's running because I have this enter first number, and because now the program is running. But now if I try to enter second number and 0, then line 4 will try to divide 10 by 0. And you know that it's not possible to divide a number by 0. So if I continue, I press enter, it will give me an exception. So this is what we say, that an exception is an event that occurs during the execution of a program. So you see my program was just running fine, but the moment that I put 0 and I try to divide by 0, an exception will occur there. And that is what we say, it's called an exception. So basically, an exception is just a situation that Python cannot cope up with. That's the simple definition of what an exception is. And someone might ask, maybe, why is it dangerous? It is dangerous because, as you have seen in the example, it leads to sudden termination of the program. So all of a sudden the program just ends because there's an exception. Other things is that it can block the application, it can cause data loss, and even it can corrupt data file. If you're using the data files, it can corrupt them. So those are the implications of the exception. That's why there is need for us to learn about handling exceptions. Maybe you might ask, what is the difference between an exception and an error? So errors cannot be handled, but exceptions can be handled. And in my notes here, I have a detailed difference between the errors, specifically the syntax error and the exception error. A syntax error is, let's say I missed one bracket here, that's a syntax error. So in syntax error, this code won't run at all. I can just put it in the second line so that you can see that the code, for example, this error was in this second line. The first line has no problem, but the second line has an error, and it's a syntax error. So if I run this code, you'll see that code will not run at all because it's an error. So you can see the code will not run at all, and that is an example of a syntax error. But you have seen with the exception, the code works, but under certain conditions. In this example, maybe if you put division by 0, the code will not run. So that's the main difference between an exception and an error. But if you want detailed definitions, they're here in the notes, and as usual, all these notes and the code is available in our GitHub repository, and the link will be in this video's description. So the next thing, we'll just look at the common type of exceptions. So the first type is this one called the value error, and this exception is raised when a function receives an argument of the correct type but an inappropriate value. For example, we have learned about this int function. I'll just put a print statement here to say that the program is running, then I'll show you what I mean. So you have this int function. We said that this int function is used to convert a data type from another type to an integer, but in most cases it's used with strings. I'll just show you how to use that. For example, we had this example of, let's say, age was a string of 26, and if I wanted to convert this into an integer, I'll just use the int function, then you pass their age. Then if I store this to another variable, let's say I'll store it to int age. Then if I print the type of this int age, if I just print the type of this new variable called int age, then I run this code, you see that it will tell me this int age is of type integer, and you can see there it's of type int. That is because initially it was of type string, then you converted it to integer. So that works fine. So this int function expects a string or any numeric. It expects an numeric string, then you convert that numeric string to an integer. But what if you pass this? You pass something like, let's say I pass a string that is not is like something like 2. 2 is a string, but it's not a numeric string. So if I run this code now, let us see what will happen. You can see the program. You can see this statement. The program is running was printed. That means that our program was running because this line 1 was executed. But once it reached line 5, it tried to convert this 2 into an integer, and it's not possible. And that was an exception, and that is called the value error exception. So that's the first common type of the exception. The other type is this one called the type error, where you try to do an operation or a function is applied to an object with an appropriate type. Like, but the simple example is just to add a string to an integer. For example, I have this string here. Maybe I try to add that string age plus an integer, let's say 2. Then maybe I can just print this. So if I try to print that here, you can see the syntax is just correct. And if I run this code, the program will run. But once it reaches line 5, it will stop running. And that is called a type error exception, because you cannot add a string to an integer in Python. And you can see the program is running because you can see this line was executed, and that is called a type error exception. The other exception is called the index error, where you try to access an index that is out of range. For example, let me use this example that is here in the notes. So I'll just use the same example. So I'll just paste here. So I have this list that has 3 items, 1, 2, and 3. Then I'm trying to access a list that is index 5. But if you see this list that is provided here, it goes up to index 2. So if I try to access something that is out of bounds and run this code, it will be an exception. So the program will run, means the syntax is just fine, so it will run. So after running, I'll have this index error here, and that is the other common type of exceptions. So you have seen that there are this value error exception, type error exception, and index error exception, and also other exceptions in Python. So we have to learn how to handle those exceptions, because I've said earlier that with exceptions we can handle them, and maybe you can avoid those exceptions from happening. Be with us in the next video. We'll learn about how to handle exceptions in Python using the try except block. So see you there. Peace out.